Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back. I'm so excited to dive into today's episode, Awakening Part 2 from my cancer diagnosis on. And this is really the beginning of my deep dive into my healing journey that was sparked by this diagnosis. And it will go through 2020, so about 4 years there. And I will do a separate video from 2020 on because the amount of things that have happened in the last few years just ramped up. So separated into 3 parts in total. As I started getting into in the very end of that first phase, first awakening video, I was diagnosed in March 2016, March 22nd, and it immediately followed my Uncle Don's passing. So my Uncle Don had had cancer himself, and honestly, I don't even remember the precise kind he had, but it was one of the kinds that was not a great one. He was on a clinical trial, and the clinical trial wasn't really going well, so he decided to take himself off the trial. And the doctor had given him 6 months, and he went within 3 days. That very night, I woke up with sharp shooting pain in my left shoulder. My dad had received the call, and it was one of the only times I've seen my dad cry in his life. He was the uncle that my dad was closest to, my dad's brother. They were closest in age. And that night, I had some chest pain and a lot of coughing that was just getting worse, but I had gone to a couple doctors, hadn't figured it out yet. But that was the night that I woke up with very sharp shooting pain in my left shoulder. And I knew that morning I woke up and I knew this was not something I could wait any longer on. So I did what any self-respecting adult does. They start Googling symptoms, right? So that morning I sat in bed after a very restless night and I was Googling my symptoms. And what I came up with was pulmonary embolism and cancer. And of course, I would only entertain pulmonary embolism, but I called up my doctor. I said, I need a CT scan this afternoon. And the receptionist, she obviously thought I was a little crazy. She, on the other end of the line, I heard her kind of laugh, scoff, and like, who is this crazy girl? And she was like, you need a reason to get a CT scan. And I can guarantee you right now, you won't be getting one this afternoon. You need insurance approval. There's a whole process, yada, yada, yada. And I just paused and I was like, okay, well, what's the earliest appointment I can have this afternoon? And so I scheduled the appointment. I go in, talk to my doctor. I had seen him a few months prior to, address the minor pain in my chest. And because of that, he sent me down for an x-ray. He was like, well, you look healthy, you look fine, but we'll check it out. We'll make sure there's nothing actually wrong in there. So I go down, I change into the little gown. I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. And I remember walking out of the x-ray room and the technician, I could have sworn that he looked at me sideways as I walked out. And I did not want to entertain anything negative. So I was like, maybe he thinks I'm cute or something because he was young. Then I change. I go back up to my doctor's office and he brings me back into the room. He pulls up the x-rays and I see his face just kind of lock in position as he's looking at the screen. And he goes, Then he turns his screen and he points his pen in front of it and he says, you see this white film in front of your left lung? I have no idea what that is. And then he turns and he looks me in the eyes and he goes, it looks like you've earned that CT scan after all. Sure enough, I got it that afternoon. We got the insurance approval. It all just happened because the next morning I was flying off to my uncle's funeral. So there I was at the airport and we were boarding. It was early in the morning and I got a call and I picked up and the lady on the other end goes, "Hi, I'm calling from the pet center. I'm calling you to schedule your scan." And I was like, "What? What's a PET scan?" And I hear the pregnant pause on the other end, and she goes, "Oh, have you spoken with your doctor?" And I was like, "No." And she goes, "Okay, well, maybe you should speak with your doctor, and when you're ready, you can give us a call back to schedule it." And I was just like, "Oh, fuck. What does this mean?" And I felt like it wasn't good. So I hung up. I immediately called my doctor back, and naturally, he was in with the patient. So I immediately started Googling PET scans and what they're used for. What are they used for? Diagnosing cancer. So my intuition just knew. I did not want it to be right. However, my intuition knew I needed that CT scan that afternoon. And when we got back from the funeral, I had that PET scan scheduled for a week later, basically. And then we scheduled the appointment with the surgeon. And this surgeon was one of the top chest surgeons in the country, I suppose you could say, arguably, because he was working in Manhattan and they're known to have a lot of the top doctors at the top hospitals. And yes, this particular surgeon had performed open heart surgery on a former president. So I felt like I was in good hands, and I was like, whatever this is, please just get it out of me. And unfortunately, he got the PET results and was like, "This is not a job for me." And we were like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, see, my best guess is this is lymphoma, and lymphomas you do not treat with surgery because it is a blood cancer. It goes all through the body. There is no guarantee that if they performed some kind of surgery, they would get it all. So how do they treat it? Chemotherapy." So what happened next? I needed a biopsy to determine precisely what kind of cancer it was. And so then I had to schedule the biopsy. And when I went in for that biopsy, they had to go into my chest. And because of the location of this, they had, a disclaimer. And when I went in, it was early in the morning and I had low blood sugar. I fainted, of course, when they put in the little IV, whatever the IV was, I don't even remember. And after going through that ordeal, I then had to get the biopsy. So they walk over and they're like, "We just want you to know, and we have to tell you that there is a chance that we will pierce your lungs or your heart. Are you aware of that? And do you want to proceed?" And I was like, "All right, just please do your job well, guys." Like, what am I supposed to say at that point, right? So this is the process that I went through. Now, in the meantime, I was Googling the heck out of everything. When I was at my uncle's funeral, in Oklahoma, mind you, I was like, of course, I am in Oklahoma. But I was researching all the things that you can do to heal cancer on your own while I was going through this ordeal, because I knew that I had to heal the family pattern of dying from cancer. That was the message that came through. It was my job to heal the family pattern of dying from cancer. I did not call it such at the time, but that was a download that I received from my higher self, from source, whatever you want to call it. I did not understand this world of spirituality the way I do now, but I knew, my intuition knew that that was a message from beyond Amanda Erin Kelly, this human form. That was a message from beyond. And my intuition just knowing that I had to get that CT scan that day, that was also a message that was beyond my human brain, if you will. So at this point, we can say pretty decisively that this was a moment in time where I was being awakened to the true power of my intuition, to the true power and access I had to this field of consciousness that was beyond my thinking brain. And I was not understanding it as such at the time, but In hindsight, I can look back and know that those messages were guiding me from beyond, that my uncle even passed away when he did within 3 days rather than 6 months to save my life. So it was a very humbling journey, but also very deeply reassuring on some soul level, because I also had this very deep knowing that it was not my time to die. It was a little trite at the time, but I had this thought, this intuition that this was my quarter life crisis. And I was like, okay, great. That means I'll live to 120. And it might sound a little trite and frivolous to be having these silly thoughts in the middle of a very dire cancer diagnosis, but there was that deep part of me that knew I wasn't going to die. Now, fast forward a couple years or a year and a half later, or whatever, I was sitting in a cafe in the town that I grew up in, basically, and this guy was sitting at a different table. This was one of the cafes, local cafes that people go to do work and write and study. They bring their laptops. And he had some interesting books on the table. And I commented, I don't even remember what they were. One of them was on my list. I was like, oh, how is that book? I've been meaning to read that. And so then a conversation sparked. And then I saw him again either later that week or the following week, whatever it was. And we got into deeper conversation, and I started sharing my journey a little bit. And he was a professor of philosophy and something related to science. So it was something like neuroscience or behavior and philosophy. So he had this really fascinating background. He was an academic, he was a thinker. And when I told him, I was like, yeah, I knew I wasn't going to die. He was like, he fought me back. He was like, there's no way you could know that. And I was like, well, I did know. And he was like, you didn't know. You thought maybe, you guessed. And I was like, no, I knew. And that moment for me was such a poignant moment in my understanding of the brain logic versus this broader field of intuitive knowing, of this spiritual connection, of this divine knowing that we have access to as long as we open ourselves up to it and allow ourselves to listen. So if I had not listened to these messages, if I had downplayed them, my experience may have been very, very different. I may have felt more defeated. I may have bought into the story that nobody in my family had survived cancer because I was the seventh or the eighth diagnosed, and everyone else before me had passed away. So my dad's parents, four of my dad's siblings, and my cousin, they had all died from cancer or cancer related or treatment related complications. So the odds were not in my favor. Had I looked at the quote unquote logic, the rational evidence stacked against me, that would not have been in my service. But instead, I had these very, very deep, profound knowings that I knew I was being helped, guided, protected, even though I didn't even put it in those terms. I knew there was something bigger that was happening through me. And it was my job to heal. It was my job to not just heal myself, but the family pattern of dying from cancer. And then fast forward, I learned more about epigenetics, and then I realized how much sense that makes. And then you get into that. I think this is a very typical Native American philosophy perspective of healing, going 7 generations back, but also 7 generations forward. So the deeper you go with your own healing, of healing a pattern of the trauma, of the stuck emotions, you not only heal the family lineage going backward, but you heal it going forward. You heal it in both directions. So this healing is very profound. When we choose to heal, this changes everything for the family. Now, fast forward a couple years, and my dad was diagnosed. And fast forward a little longer, my cousin was diagnosed with the same cancer his father had been diagnosed with and passed away from. And here's the thing. I was so devastated that I had failed in my mission. But guess what? They both survived. And they both said that I had given them hope. So never discount the amount that your journey can inspire others, the amount that the way you show up in the world can give others hope and inspiration and a shift in perspective on what is possible. And I think that's the big thing. Possibility. Is it possible for us to survive? I didn't even entertain the possibility that I wouldn't. And it got pretty hairy in one round, although I did handle treatment very well because I was doing everything on the side behind my doctor's back, honestly, which that's another episode where I will get into all the things I did to help heal my body from treatment, during treatment, and to heal the cancer, to heal my body, to mitigate the side effects. All of it worked because by the last round, my doctors and nurses were just astonished. They were like, "How are you doing so well right now?" And I was like, "It's not rocket science, but it's probably not stuff you're going to pay any attention to." So I just kind of shrugged my shoulders. But that third round, I actually got a very intense fever the night before I was supposed to go in for that round. I started to burn with a fever and I wound up being in the hospital. They admitted me that night. And for 4 days before treatment started, they had to figure out my infection. And it turned out my PICC line had gotten infected. So when they finally figured that out, they had to remove it, put another one in, and let my body recover a bit. But after 4 days of being feverish, I even went into rigors. My immune system was very low at that point. Even though I handled treatment well overall, I had 6 rounds, 100 hours each of chemo, inpatient for 4 days at a time, nonstop infusion. So it was pretty intense. And by the time I started treatment, my body was already depleted. So that round was much more difficult for me. And then the fourth round, I experienced more side effects as well because I had less recovery time because they kept me on the same schedule, even though I was in the hospital for like 9 days, 8 nights, 9 days that time. I stayed on the same schedule. So I didn't have that same amount of recovery time. And I experienced some of the mouth sores. I experienced a bit of nausea and loss of appetite and stuff like that. And I honestly experienced a lot fewer side effects than most people who went through my same treatment did because I was doing all this stuff on the side. So because of my mindset, because of my intuitive knowing, that really guided me to look beyond treatment. My intuition guided me throughout that entire process to know that there was something more that was being missed because I did not trust the treatment because of what had happened to my family. I knew there had to be another way, and yet my left lung was pretty close to collapsing. I had a grapefruit-sized growth inside my chest, compressing my heart and my lungs, 2 millimeters of breathing space on my left side. So my left lung could have collapsed, really. And at that point, my sister's wedding was 6 months away. I have the maid of honor. It's just the two of us. So I didn't want to put my family in a position of worrying even more if I didn't go forward with treatment. However, I had entertained that. For a moment, I entertained that before I went ahead with the chemotherapy because I had been in touch with a naturopath who was like, "Oh, lymphoma is easy." And I didn't love the way she put that because she was almost a little flippant about it. But it also, in a sense, reassured me that there was something deeper going on. And it wasn't just, "Oh, my DNA betrayed me." It was not about that because here's the thing. As much cancer as there was in my family, I went to a GP like a year, 2 years after diagnosis, maybe. And I did not qualify for genetic testing as covered by insurance. There had to be particular relationships between the cancers, and the cancers were not genetically related. None of them were the same up until then. So then that got my little wheels spinning. I was like, okay, this is not genetic. What the heck is it then? Because this does not make sense for one family to have that much cancer. And there was no known particular environmental exposure, as far as I'm aware, as far as some kind of toxin. And again, multiple different forms. So, what was really going on? And then I learned about epigenetics, and then I realized, oh, this goes so much deeper into the energy and the trauma and what happens in the environmental layer. And maybe there was some kind of toxic exposure that, because of the particular life experiences, it manifested in different organs within the body. I don't know. My grandmother, to be fair, she was a longtime smoker and she got lung cancer. So that one made sense. That one made, quote unquote, logical sense. Like also like, okay, she kind of did that to herself. But then the rest of the cancers didn't make sense. My dad's youngest brother had died first, honestly, and it was super sad. I was little, and he had died from Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so, yes, I had lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's though. So what is the relationship between those two? And those are the only two lymphomas. It's not even super clear. Non-Hodgkin's and Hodgkin's are different. So with all that in mind, I was like, there is something much bigger going on with cancer. And now, zooming back out into the present moment, look at the rise in cancer rates. There is so much going on in the world right now that is just basically a perfect breeding ground for cancer. It's not just the environmental toxins, and it's certainly not bad DNA, because if it was bad DNA, the rates of cancer would not be changing the way they are. It depends on genetic expression, and what determines genetic expression is environmental factors, and a lot of those environmental factors are modulated and regulated by emotions. And how are our emotions regulated? By our thoughts. And what has been going on in the world? Fear. Fear, 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 fear. The fear has been pushed non-stop the last couple years, going on 3. Isolation, one of the biggest risk factors for people passing away from cancer. People who don't have a social support network. They have done multiple studies on this. I found those studies when I was going through treatment. People who felt isolated, who didn't feel that they had people to talk to, they were more likely to die from cancer. And I looked at all of that and I made very deliberate choices because of the research I had done. Vitamin D was also super important. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just go soak in the sun. My skin color changed. I am less pale at baseline than I was back then. And I that's just my baseline. I don't even get sun regularly, and it's a different color now, but I can tolerate more sunlight, and that's to my benefit because sunlight is so key for healing. Guess what else is mitigated when you have sufficient DNA, not DNA, vitamin D, a certain virus that was going around. What were the mitigating factors for people who got sick? Having an adequate supply of vitamin D, C, zinc. They didn't really talk about that. They know these things. Vitamin D, across the board, cancer patients are deficient in vitamin D. I was very deficient. So there's so many layers to the actual healing part, but what happened was I started to see the way the system wasn't working. I went off birth control so I could freeze my eggs, and then I realized how harmful long-term use of birth control can be. I had been on it for about a dozen years only because it was convenient to know when it came. I went on it because I was a cheerleader in college. So going back to the cheerleading, that also put me on track to be on birth control for almost a dozen years nonstop. A couple times I ran out, had to re-regulate, but we're talking just a handful of months that I was off it in that 12 years. And what does birth control do? One of the things is that it reduces magnesium in the body by a dramatic amount, and magnesium is implicated in over 300 bodily reactions. Super important mineral. What else is most of the population deficient in? Magnesium. But what exacerbates that? Birth control. We don't get nearly the same amount of nutrients as we used to from our food, but the pharmaceuticals that we ingest, the pollutants in our water, in our food, it's all draining us of these really, really crucial, important nutrients, these essential nutrients. So then I got deeper into the mindset. My background in psychology helped me immediately grab onto this. And I really started to see the power of my thoughts and emotions. I was visualizing myself being healthy and happy and healed very regularly. I was putting myself in the energy of being at my sister's wedding, cancer-free, happy, healthy, dancing. And everybody else around me, our whole family was just celebrating pure joy. We could fully be in the moment with my sister and her wedding, not with this cloud of, is Amanda going to be okay, hanging over the whole thing. We did not want that. I did not want that. And I was not going to let that happen to my sister. So I was visualizing myself being completely healthy and healed at her wedding with my beautiful wig. And that's exactly what happened. I was healed by the wedding. I danced a lot. I had a great time. I was at her bachelorette party between rounds 5 and 6, no less. I, helped plan the bridal shower. I did most of the planning for all of those events. And, it gave me something to look forward to. What else did I do? I gave myself more things to look forward to during treatment and also after treatment. I immediately signed up for a health coaching program. As soon as treatment was over, I was like, this is it. And I also knew that that was the direction I wanted to go in, because I was like, I'm learning so much. I have to help people. Now, it's been a long journey getting myself into a place where I have felt I had a lot of trauma to work through, a lot of body healing to get through. But I was like, I've learned so much. And I booked myself a yoga retreat to look forward to. That was 2 weeks after treatment, or 2.5. 2.5 weeks after treatment, I was on a plane by myself to a yoga retreat. It was off season, so the plane was virtually empty. And the yoga retreat was amazing. I also was very ballsy and didn't think about the lung thing whatsoever when I decided to go scuba diving, but thankfully all was good. We didn't go very deep, but I literally dove headfirst back into life. And I was letting myself visualize all these amazing things I was going to do after treatment. And I really think that put me in the energy, the frequency of already being healed. And I will never know to this day at what point the cancer was gone, because they scanned me after 2 rounds and it was 88% gone. I had 6 rounds. I probably didn't need all 6, but that was the protocol, yada, yada, yada. In hindsight, I probably would have put my foot down and insisted on a scan after the 3rd round, maybe the 4th. And I think my doctor knew that when I saw that it was gone, I wouldn't have finished treatment, because why get 200 excess hours of chemotherapy? Maybe 300, right? And I also knew that I was doing all this other stuff on the side that was supporting my body. So I was not worried about it coming back, because I learned so much else about what I was missing. I was a healthy, hot power yogi vegetarian, but I had so many gaps in what I thought healthy was. So I wasn't actually healthy, obviously. Otherwise, I would not have been diagnosed with cancer in the first place. So I went through the health coaching thing. And at some point in that journey, in that process, I was living my life, went to this conference, super fun. But just after New Year's, I suppose it was, gut health issues kicked into high gear, because chemo destroys the gut lining. So then I had the opportunity to go even deeper into all the ways in which cancer treatment really destroys the body. It destroys the fast healing cells, the chemotherapy itself does. And gut lining, part of the reason for most of the side effects is that the gut lining cells are replaced very quickly as well, just like hair cells, just like skin cells. That's why so many of the side effects, well, obviously, I lost my hair, and many of the side effects are related to skin and the digestive tract, because those are the fast growing cells in the body, and chemotherapy targets fast growing cells. It does not discriminate. It does not target cancer. So everything suffers. And that's why people suffer greatly under these treatments, because it's literally poison to the body. It's literally killing the cells in your body. So I got further perspective and nuance into all the ways in which cancer patients are not supported after treatment, because they just drop you, basically. If your blood work looks good, it's a very baseline examination of your blood levels, by the way. Do you have enough white blood cells? Great. Are they increasing? Great. They didn't even make me get a scan, for the record, after my remission scan. I still haven't had a single one since. I've had blood work, but not a single one since. So the excessive scanning is also not good. Radiation, they overdo that for the vast majority, would be my guess. And that contributes a great deal to anxiety for a lot of people. They get scanxiety. It's a real thing for cancer patients and survivors. And I think there's a lot of unnecessary scanxiety going on out there. And there's so much fear in the way they push people into making decisions very quickly, into, getting these scans regularly, getting the blood work. I decided to opt out at a certain point when I felt healthy, and I took my healing into more holistic routes, because I was not getting the answers I needed from the traditional Western mentality. I was suffering greatly from insomnia. They put me on Ativan throughout treatment, and I was like, I'm done with all of this. So I stopped the Ativan, and I was still struggling a great deal with insomnia over a year later. So I eventually bit the bullet, and I was like, okay, let me just try to nip the bud with this. I went to my GP and I asked for support, and she gave me a prescription, and I was like, all right, I will just take this until I'm regulated, and then I will wean myself back off, was my thought process. I took the thing for about a week, even though I had vowed no more pharmaceuticals. I was like, okay, I am struggling. I am suffering. This isn't changing. So I had dealt with gut health issues. I was still dealing a great deal with the insomnia. And about a week in, I woke up one morning and I could not stop crying. Could not stop crying. Sobbing. Deep, deep sobs. And I was in the depths of despair for no reason. Obviously, my life was not exactly where I wanted it to be. I was still healing, still hadn't figured out everything, but this was beyond frustration. This was true despair. And it was scary. It was a really scary feeling. I could not get myself out of it. I called my mom. I was living a few doors down from her at the time. And she came over, and she's not the person I would always call on to be supported in the past. And she was very concerned, and it was crazy because a little while after, I just snapped out of it. It ended. I was fine again. I could stop crying. And I was like, that was weird. My brain just snapped out of it. And I was like, what was that? And I was like racking my brain. I was like, what on earth could have triggered this? And all of a sudden, I was like, the only thing I've done different is take that pill. So I looked it up. Trazodone, sure enough, is an antidepressant. Antidepressants, a lot of them make people suicidal. It was the only time in my life where I ever understood how people got to that point. Not that I was at that point myself, but I felt so deep in despair. I did not see a way out. And I remember having this thought, I get it. I get why people get to that point. It was very jarring. And I am very grateful that I never did experience that again because I stopped taking the pill immediately. But it was just another example for me to see all the ways in which the system within which we work, both with physical health and mental health, how it is not a healthcare system. It is a medical industry. It is a medication industry based on profit, built on profit. Do you know how much my cancer treatment cost? $500,000 plus, over $500,000. Why do you think they wanted me to go through all 6 rounds? They would not have gotten nearly as much money if I'd only done 3 or 4. Of course, they weren't going to scan me after 3 or 4 because then I would have said no, and all of that profit would have disappeared. I know that's a pretty stark way of looking at it, but let's just look at the amount of profits these pharmaceutical companies make. 2022, Pfizer made over $100 billion in profit. What are their real interests here? We know we're only kidding ourselves if we don't acknowledge this. So that brings me back to how my intuition guided me away from becoming a doctor, from becoming a therapist. Even, I think I forgot to mention this in the previous episode, Awakening Part 1, that my intuition had also guided me away from getting a PhD. I had entertained that when I was in grad school, and I had discussed it with my advisor, and he was like, I would write you a letter of recommendation if this is the path you want to go forward on. And I really sat with it, and I did not like how much red tape there was in academia. There is a great deal of pressure to get funded, and to publish or die is a common phrase, publish or die. You have to get funding for your research. How do you get funding? Well, you have to get your research approved by certain organizations. If they don't like what you're studying, they're not going to fund it. If your results do not match what is in alignment with the current paradigm, with the current understanding, good luck getting published. You might get relegated to some obscure journal or something like that. But if you want to be taken seriously in academia, if you want to get published, you have to go with the current understanding. If you want to research really, if you really want to do your own thing, academia is probably not going to get you there. Those ivory towers come with a lot of red tape. So I realized that my path was so many times averted away from being within the system, but going through cancer and the recovery process allowed me to see everything that was really deeply wrong within the system very clearly by going through the belly of the beast myself. Fast forward, I finally moved to Miami a few months after that incident with the trazodone. I finally got to the bottom of my insomnia through my holistic Chinese medicine doctor that I found just a few blocks away from me. Definitely was guided, right? I needed sunshine, moved to the beach, found a holistic doctor that finally got to the root of my insomnia. Adrenal fatigue stage 3. Guess what stage 4 is? Kidney failure. The only stage that is recognized by Western medicine is kidney failure. They do not recognize the first 3 stages because there is no simple, quick fix pill they can throw at it. There is no expensive procedure they can prescribe. That is how our system works. It's dark, and that's the truth. It's very sad that that is the current mentality of so many people, of trusting the white lab coats over all else, trusting the experts over their intuition. This is what steers people in the wrong direction, turning away from nature. This is what we have been doing, and this is where we have been going wrong. This was very much the journey that I was guided to go on so I could return to the truth that we are a part of nature, that we are not separate from nature, that we are not above nature, but that we are infinitely capable. Our potential has only been tapped to the minutest amount. We have the capacity to heal if we allow it, if we believe it, if we allow it, if we open ourselves up to that possibility, it will happen. That is the placebo effect. You know what else happens? The nocebo effect. When doctors, quote unquote, give patients so and so days, months, years to live, people very often latch on to that. They attach to it to the degree where it becomes reality almost to the day. They die within that 3 months. They die 6 months to the day almost, sometimes 5 years to the day. So when doctors say they give them that much time to live, it is a death sentence that they're giving them. It is very irresponsible. Again, that is another video that I will get into. So so a lot shifted for me when I moved to Miami. I was suddenly living a beautiful lifestyle at the beach, not dealing with winter anymore. And I was getting a lot of sunshine, a lot of water, a lot of beach, a lot of nature. I felt much more connected and grounded. I felt cleansed. I felt nourished. Nature is so healing. I did not have nearly enough of it living in Manhattan, obviously. And even in the suburbs, it's a very indoor lifestyle, especially in the winter. And I really was not thriving in the Northeast winters. I needed to get out, and I did, and everything aligned for me. I found this amazing living situation blocks away from the beach, away from Whole Foods where I could walk. There was easy parking for my car, and my car was literally a beach car. So I was like, how did it take me so long to get here? But I had this preconception of Miami. And when I went there, I had gone there in March 2018 for a girls' weekend. And when I was down there, I was like, oh, normal people live here. There's yoga studios, there's juice bars, there's Whole Foods. It's not all crazy clubs and parties. I went on Craigslist of all things, and just like that, I found a place with normal, cool girls. So I immediately had a couple contacts, a little social network that I could just, join in when I first arrived and get the lay of the land for a little bit. So that really helped me to move forward in my life, and my time in Miami, I absolutely adored. I was there through December 2020. Through that initial part of my awakening for sure. And in 2019, I was really beginning to settle back into my body after I had done that adrenal fatigue healing. And I came across this program that really activated me to another level. I went to Puerto Rico on this trip. It was like a retreat. And it was very highly activating. And we did this heart activation. And so at that time, I was being activated in ways that I didn't even consciously understand, but I was starting to have visions of the higher level self, of the diamond crystalline body. We had this heart activation, which, again, I'll do another video of some of the activations that I have experienced in my life, to go a little deeper into it. This one is more about my overarching journey, right? So at that time, we went into the heart, and I had a little treasure chest that I opened up, and we were being guided through this. And what's in your treasure chest? What it was in my treasure chest? A diamond. And what was the next thing I saw? Me in the river, holding out my arms. It was like the water was up to about my chest or whatever, and I was holding out my arms in front of me, kind of slowly twisting them, and my arm itself was shimmering like a diamond. It was like that crystalline water essence flowing through me. It was like my skin was translucent and morphed as the sun hit it almost. Hard to explain. I wish I could create some kind of visual, or, what do they call those things? Like, not that it would be an NFT, but those like graphic things that people make these days with AI art, I suppose it is. Just to portray some of the things I see in my mind when I go into these activation states. I've seen some incredibly beautiful things. And that was one of them. And it was this deep activation that I didn't fully understand at the time, but it really, really shifted things for me. Later on that year, I was fortunate enough to go on a trip to South Africa with a group of cancer survivors as well. It's kind of like a mission trip. We were volunteering at a hospital there, and it was also a retreat to help process our experience. So that was an incredible experience that I got to go on. So things really started to open back up for me in 2019. I was brought to some beautiful, incredibly activating places in the world. Table Mountain in Cape Town. Wow. There is an incredible amount of potent energy there. And I got to go to the Cape of Good Hope. And there was all sorts of stuff that happened in that time that was very synchronistic. I even wound up having an interview in South Africa. I flew to London for an interview, and then they set me up with the interview in South Africa right after my trip was ending. So it was all these synchronicities. And then I realized I wasn't quite in the space to be living that life that they were. I would have been living abroad entirely if I got that job. And I didn't know that I was really in that space at that point to do that. So it did not pan out for the best, but it was quite an opportunity that opened me up to what was possible for me. And it was also at some point in that time, that summer, after that retreat to Puerto Rico, that I had this idea for Healing Back to Wholeness, this program. And that was my guiding focal point. I knew it had to be a group program, and I knew it had to be this journey that people went on to embody that feeling of being whole. I didn't even know what that felt like yet. I knew I had to get there first myself. I felt like I was close. Little did I know the journey that I would be guided on. But it took me a couple years to figure out what that meant. And little did I know how much more nervous system healing I had to go through. But that vision has kept me going forward this whole time. That was back in 2019. It kept me focused on the goal of the feeling that I knew was possible, and the vision of what I was here to create. That helped me keep moving forward. My solar plexus also came back line 7 years almost to the day that I had that sexual assault experience where everything I felt had been sucked out of me. Almost to the day, my solar plexus started coming back online. And what do I mean by that? I literally felt my nerves in that region, because there's a huge cluster of nerves at each of the chakras. That nerve center started tingling, and I almost got a little concerned. I was like, what the heck is happening in my body right now? For a couple days, I just felt all these tingles, and I realized, oh my gosh, this again was my intuition. This is my solar plexus coming fully back online. So that was fascinating. And then there was, at some point that summer also, my head hit the pillow one night, and all of a sudden I was traveling through space and time. I had not been meditating. I had been reading the Gene Keys at that point. I had not been meditating. My head hit the pillow, boom, traveling through space and time. That's what it felt like, as if I was flying through the galaxy. And then the next night it happened again. And I just trusted it. I was like, okay, let's keep going. Where are we going? I just kept asking. I was like, okay, where are we going? And then it morphed into purple geometry, kept spinning through my third eye. And then it morphed. That purple kept morphing. That geometry started forming into beings. And I had a very clear vision of a man all of a sudden. And that man very quickly morphed into another man, 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 like flashing through my brain, very vivid images of men, as if we were going back in time, like 1700s, and then all the way back to like Neanderthal, whatever. I was like, what is happening? And my intuition very clearly told me after that was all the men that had taken advantage in past lives. And I was shocked. I was blown away. And that was part of some kind of healing process. And this, all of this stuff takes a while to integrate. So when we have these kind of pivotal, profound moments, it doesn't mean you have that and you're fully activated and everything's healed and perfect. And now all of a sudden you can see beings and stuff like that. For some people, yes, that happens, but everybody has their own journey. And I'm just sharing mine because my journey is very unique compared to anyone else's, and that's exactly the point. And hopefully me sharing my journey might trigger some sparks of knowing for anybody who comes across this, because in hindsight, I can go back and put these pieces together in sequence and see how it was all guiding me forward, and how none of it was accidental, and how even the timing of everything was perfect in a way, and how I've needed to integrate. I got very impatient and very frustrated at many points in my journey because I was like, why is it taking me so long to figure my shit out? And it's this deep trust that you have to surrender into and know that this is all guiding you somewhere really, really potent. When you're going through these kind of activations, when you're going through these journeys, there's always a reason for it. I can see very clearly that I had to experience everything I did to get to this point where I am now, where I have embodied knowing of a lot of the difficulties that so many people experience. You know, we all have our particular lens, but there's so much commonality to what we experience, right? So I've had narcissistic bosses. I've also had very incredible manifestation experiences. I was like, oh, I would love to go on a 100-foot yacht when my friend had told me about being invited on a yacht day, and it turned out to be a 100-foot yacht. I was like, I would love to go on a 100-foot yacht. A few weeks later, I got an invitation to go on a boat. Turned out it was 98-foot yacht. I was like, well, that's close enough, universe. Thank you very much. But I also learned about energetic self-sabotage when we get the thing we want, but then something else falls out the back end. I had to go through a great deal of financial struggle. I was getting back on my feet, working 3 jobs at once at one point. That didn't last very long. I did not have the energy for that. But yeah, I was doing everything I could at certain points to get back, but this goal kept helping me move forward because there was a lot of moments of pain and frustration because I was exhausted. My body wasn't cooperating. Nothing was seeming to fall into place. I was like, why is this so difficult? Why do I keep facing challenge after challenge after challenge? Why is none of it working? I went deeper into the trauma. I went deeper into the alignment. I went deeper into the worthiness and the purpose and all of it. And finally, things began to shift by 2020. So I will leave it off there. And I can't wait to pick up in the next episode with how things really took off for me in 2020. And we all know what a pivotal year that was for humanity. So we'll dive in shortly. Onward and upward in love and light. Thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to sharing more soon.